Shalom, everybody. Welcome to this week's Journey Through Torah. This week, we are looking at parasha Massei, which closes out this book. You know, Matot and Massei are most often read together as a double portion. As we're closing out this book, some of the things that we find is what are the important things before we move on to the next thing? Okay, we addressed this a little bit in the prior parasha, but it still follows through into what we're getting into here, because Moshe is about to address the people as his final address. And what are the things they are to remember? What are the things that are to be established once they go into the land? What are some of the things, the duties and responsibilities, and the things they are tasked with as they go into the land? These are some things that we need to pay attention to. These are some things that will help set precedent for a good life as the people go into the land. So one of the things we look at here as we get into parasha Massei is Numbers 33:1. It says, "These are the journeys of Bnei Israel when they came out of Mitzrayim by their divisions under the hand of Moshe and Aaron." So one of the things that we see here, Massei, is journeys. This is about the journeys. There are 42 encampments that are listed here. There's in the span of 40 years, they're journeying through life. And when they came out of Mitzrayim, the first and foremost, Moshe and Aaron, they went and they told Pharaoh to let my people go, that they will go into the wilderness to worship me and to have a festival to me in the wilderness. The idea, first and foremost, for them coming out of Mitzrayim was to go to the mountain to worship Yahweh. And that's what Yahweh said as well when he sent Moshe. He says, "This will be the sign that I have sent you. When you bring them out, you will bring the people back here to this mountain." So here we are. The people have gone to the mountain and they worship Yahweh. And now, instead of going directly into the land from there, they chose to send spies into the land. And we know how that went, right? They were faithless. 10 of them were. 2 people stood for what Yahweh had said, Caleb and Joshua. And the other 10 were just, no, we can't do it. Yeah, the land is everything that Yahweh said it was, and the fruit is great. And yeah, but we can't do it. So here we are for the next generation. Will the next generation be faithful to go through here? And it's not just about the destination, is what we've learned. Yes, the destination is a very important part, right? He wanted them to go into the land, take possession of it, and to be blessed in it. But it was the process of getting to the destination, i.e. the journey. It was the journey that determined if they were going into the destination. See, how we live life in the journey will determine how we go into the destination, how we walk into the destination. You know, it's one of the interesting things in life is so many people are just looking to the next thing. Just get me through to the next thing. Just get me onto the next thing that can help me. Just if I could only do that, then life would be okay. If I could only do that, or if I could only have this. It's destination addiction syndrome. That's not a good thing to have. It's the idea of if I could just get to the next thing or have the next thing, then life will be better. We put all of our faith and everything that we are into the next point, the next destination, instead of just having faith in the journey. See, and yes, there are life gets hard. There are trials, tribulations, temptations, things throughout the journey. But instead of just submitting to Yahweh, walking with him in the midst of the journey, we tend to say, no, all my problems are here in the journey. If I could just get to this part of the destination, all my problems would go away and everything would just be great. If I could just do that, or if I could just have this. And that's not what the Father wants us to live in, because guess what? If they were grumbling and complaining and doing all these things in the wilderness, then when they get into the land, they're going to do the same thing. Okay? It's not about the destination per se. It's about us. Are we willing to let Yahweh change us in the midst of the journey so that we can represent him here in the earth and to be a people called by his name wherever we are, wherever we go? And when he calls us up to the destination, up to go into the promise, we can walk in it confidently, knowing he goes before us and he leads us no matter where we are. He was the one leading them in the wilderness. Don't forget that. A lot of times Moses is the one who got the blame per se. He's the one who got the blame for it, but it was Yahweh they were following. But yet we hear time and again, Moses, you led us into the wilderness to die. Moses, you led us out here. No, Yahweh led them out there. They were following the pillar and the cloud, the fire and the cloud. They were following Yahweh. And when life got difficult, they looked for someone to blame instead of just looking at themselves and saying, we need to just follow Yahweh and we need to just hear his voice and to do as he says. Then they could have been in the promise so many years sooner, right? And it wouldn't have to be the next generation to do that. So life is in the journey. Life is not just about the destination. Life is in the journey. And that's where it shows our faith, our heart, our attitude in the journey, right? Time and again, we see in the journey, the people were complaining, the people were grumbling, and a couple of places in the destination or throughout the journey, the 42 encampments were, Meribah, bitterness. So these are the things that Yahweh wants us to be mindful of. I've heard someone say, patience is not waiting. Patience is your attitude while you're waiting. See, there's a difference. We can wait and still have a bad attitude, or we can wait and just let it be a blessing. So here in the journey, how are we going to live our life? Are we going to follow Yahweh in the midst of the journey? Because that's what we need to do. It's how we live life until we get to the destination. The destination, in our point, is the kingdom of Yahweh established here on earth. Guys, this is something that we need to see daily. This is something we need to pray for and work towards and have our heart for. And that is a everyday kind of a thing. We see somewhat ideas talking about a journey that we can look at here in Mark 13, verses 34 to 37. Yeshua says it's like a man away on a journey. After leaving his house and putting his servants in charge and giving each his task, he commanded the doorkeeper to watch. Therefore, stay alert, for you do not know when the master of the house is coming, whether in the evening or at midnight or when the rooster crows or early morning. So watch in case coming suddenly he finds you asleep. What I say to you all, stay alert. Now here, how do we tie this in? It says it's like a man going away on a journey. Now we know a lot of these parables, like we're talking here, Yeshua going away and we're waiting for his return, right? But the emphasis I want to point out here is that while he was going away on the journey, the people also had a journey of their own. They were given tasks and responsibilities until he returned. So are we going to faithfully carry out the tasks and responsibilities that Yahweh has called us each to here until he returns? Because his journey while he is away until he returns is the same as our journey. How are we going to live until he returns, until he comes back? And that shows us a lot about our life. And even so much so that Yahweh gave us refuge in him. It's interesting as we see here. I mean, in the journey, they weren't in places where life didn't touch them. Okay, every aspect of life that could happen, they could see in the journey. They could see during the 42 encampments, everything that could happen to them, all these things that could go on, they could experience, even death and even murder and manslaughter. All these things were addressed. What we have here is when they go into the land, they were instructed to provide a place of refuge in case someone had shed blood, but they were not guilty of murder. See, there's a difference that was between murder and manslaughter. Right? And say, oh, there was an accident, but was it really an accident? That was to be determined, because even if it was really an accident, but the person had malice or anger or resentment, bitterness in their heart towards the person, it could be regarded as murder. And that would be dangerous for them, right? But even in the midst of this, Yahweh says, when you go into the land, you're going to have cities of refuge. You're going to have a place of refuge for that. And what we learn is that there are times, guys, we're guilty. No way around it. We're guilty. We've done things in our life. It's been sin and we're guilty. We need to repent. But yet there are some things that too steep for us to pay a price for. And this is where Yahweh says, I will provide you a place of refuge. And even in the refuge cities, we see examples and pictures of Yeshua in that as well. First off, we notice first and foremost that Yahweh is our place of refuge. Nahum 1:7 It says, Adonai is good as a refuge in the day of distress, and he knows those who take refuge in him. Hebrews 6:18-20 says, so by two unchangeable things, in which it is impossible for God to lie, and we who have fled for refuge might have strong encouragement to take hold of the hope that is set before us. We have this hope as an anchor of the soul, both firm and steady, a hope that enters the inner place behind the curtain. Yeshua has entered there as a forerunner on our behalf, having become Kohen Gadol forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. So again, Yeshua going ahead of us provides a place of refuge and safety for us. As I mentioned, the Levite cities were cities of refuge. There were 42 cities given to the Levites. Okay. Remember that I believe this is pointing back to the 42 encampments in the wilderness. I also think this kind of alludes to the 42 months that were given ahead, the 3.5 years that we see in a time of tribulation. But regardless, there were 42 cities given to the Levites, and 6 cities were added. What does 6 represent in Scripture? Most often, man, the number of man, right? And in these cities, people could go to if they were guilty and they needed a redeemer. They had shed blood. They were guilty of blood, but they could go here and have a redeemer stand for them, and they could be safe within the place and the city of refuge, and they would be protected from the avenger of blood. Goel Hadam, Goel. And interesting, the redeemer of blood. Goel is also the word for redeemer. So the avenger of blood and the redeemer of blood was the same person. So what was a redeemer of blood? Well, a redeemer is someone who restores someone to a rightful position. Okay. This is normally given like the next of kin. He would bring his kinsman out of debt. He would, if he were in a debt you could not pay, your kinsman redeemer would come and he would pay that debt for you if he was able. Or they would marry a childless widow of his kinsman, like Boaz, right? Well, in this case, the avenger of blood is also the redeemer, the one who would seek out someone who killed his, let's say, who killed his brother. Then he would seek him out for justice to say, okay? And here we see an example in John 8:16. It says, yet even if I do judge, my judgment is true, for it is not I alone who judge, but I and the Father who sent me. So again, our Redeemer is also a judge of those who had shed blood and those who were guilty and those who were just guilty of, again, say manslaughter. Manslaughter is you shed blood, you're guilty of that, but there was no ill will, there was no maliciousness, there was no evil intent. It could be an accident or something that just happened, right? And so that's the difference between manslaughter and murder. And in Hebrews 2:10-17, we find, it is fitting that he, for whom and by whom all things exist, and bringing many sons to the glory, that he should make the founder of their salvation perfect through suffering. For he who sanctifies and those who are sanctified all have one source. That is why he is not ashamed to call them brothers, saying, I will tell of your name to my brothers in the midst of the congregation. I will sing your praise. That's quoting from Psalm 22:22, where it says, I will tell of your name to my brothers in the midst of the congregation. I will praise you. Hebrews 2:13 says, again, I will put my trust in him. And again, behold, I and the children God has given me, which is quoting from Isaiah 8:17-18, where it says, I will wait for Yahweh, who is hiding his face from the house of Jacob, and I will hope in him. Behold, I and the children whom Yahweh has given me are signs and portents in Israel from Yahweh Sabaoth, who dwells in Mount Zion. Hebrews 2:14 says, since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of the same things, that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil. See that? Through Yeshua, through death, he would destroy the one who has the power over death. He would be a redeemer for us. Guys, we're guilty. We've sinned. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. We're guilty. There's a price in that we cannot pay. The wages of sin is death. It's beyond us to be able to pay that. But Yeshua, he dealt with death, okay, so that he would have the power of death, he might destroy him. Hebrews 2:15, and deliver all those who through the fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery. For surely it is not angels that he helps, but he helps the offspring of Abraham. Therefore, he had to be made like his brothers in every respect, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God to make propitiation for the sins of the people. See that? He helps the offspring of Abraham. Who is the offspring of Abraham? But he who believes Yeshua is the Messiah. We believe we are seeds of Abraham and heirs according to that promise, according to Galatians 3. So again, Yeshua came to help provide and provide life, to be a redeemer for us, and to deal with death for the offspring of Abraham. And so to do this, he had to be made like his brothers in every respect, that he could be like a high priest for us and to deal with and make atonement for the sins of his people. We see in Job 19:25 and 26, it says, I know my Redeemer lives, and at the last he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I shall see God. Job was saying, my Redeemer lives, and in the last day he will stand on the earth. And after I'm dead, I know in my flesh I will see God. See, even my flesh has been destroyed. In my flesh I will see God. What does that mean? That's resurrection. It's resurrection unto life. And he knows I will see my Redeemer, and I shall see God. Isaiah 44:21 and 22 says, remember these things, Jacob and Israel, for you are my servant. I formed you. You are my servant, O Israel, and you will not be forgotten by me. I have blotted out your transgressions like a cloud, and your sins like mist. Return to me, for I have redeemed you. Luke 1:68 says, blessed be the Lord God of Israel, for he has visited and redeemed his people. Ephesians 1:7 says, in him we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of our trespasses, according to the riches of his grace. Colossians 1:14 says, in him we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. Okay, so how did this work? What was to happen here? Well, if there was something going on, and say someone would go and they would run to these cities of refuge, it was up to the leaders in that city to make judgment to say, well, is this person guilty of manslaughter or murder? And if the Redeemer of blood came to the city and they wanted this person, then the judges of that city were to determine, what are they going to do here? Was this person guilty of murder? And if so, they hand them over to the Redeemer of blood. But if they were guilty of manslaughter and it wasn't evil intent or malicious in any way, then they kept him there, and the Redeemer of the blood, the Avenger of the blood, could not touch him. He was not allowed to touch him there. As long as he was within these cities, he was protected and he would be safe within Israel. And so this is what we find in Numbers 35, verses 24 to 28. Where it says, the congregation will judge between the manslayer and the avenger of blood in accordance with these rules. And the congregation shall rescue the manslayer from the hand of the avenger of blood, and the congregation shall restore him to his city as refuge to which he had fled. And he shall live in it. Now this is interesting. He shall live in it until the death of the high priest who was anointed with the holy oil. That's interesting. We'll come back to that in a second. Verse 26 says, but if the manslayer shall at any time go beyond the boundaries of his city as refuge to which he had fled, and the avenger of blood finds him outside the boundaries of a city as refuge, and the avenger of the blood kills the manslayer, he shall not be guilty of blood. For he must remain in his city as refuge until the death of the high priest. But after the death of the high priest, the manslayer may return to the land of his possession. In other words, he will be restored. Now, the interesting thing here, as long as he is in the city of refuge, he is under the protection of the Levites, head by the high priest. He is under the protection of the high priest, that there's nothing that could happen to him there as long as he was safe within that city. If he chose to step outside of that authority, then he could bring his own guilt on him, and then he could be dealt with. The avenger of the blood could slay him and be guiltless. So as long as he was under the authority in those cities of refuge, he would be safe. Now, the interesting thing about this is that when the high priest died, something happens here, that at the death of the high priest, now these people who were guilty, they could now be restored and returned back into their home cities, back into the land of their possession, to dwell with their families and to dwell with the people of Israel. Something about the death of the high priest, let's just say, made an atonement for their guilt and for their trespass, and then they could be restored. Are you starting to see some pictures of Yeshua that's given here? Jacob Milgram puts this way: Adam is created in God's image, according to Genesis 1:27 and 9:6. This is an idiom that is used for a father-son relationship. By declaring himself to be man's kinsman, God automatically becomes man's redeemer, obligated to execute each and every murder. So again, he says, because he has used this terminology to make himself a kinsman of him, then he is now given the place where he is now to be man's redeemer as well. So now we can see, again, pictures of Yeshua and when he came, and that why he came to be a redeemer for us, and how all of this starts to fit together. In the Tabernacle Prefigured, Michael Morales writes that the death of the high priest was a type of return and a restoration for the people. He writes, consider that the high priest symbolizing Adam, and then his entrance into the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement as an ascent. The priest represented the restored creation as pertaining to humanity. He had to be perfect as a man. The high priest was also believed to be the true second Adam. It may even be precisely because he is an Adam figure that the priest's sin propagated guilt among the entire people. The high priest's atonement labors were not only accomplished on the high holy Day of Atonement, but even finally through his own death. At the pinnacle of the system stood the high priest. These Day of Atonement ceremonies enabled God to continue dwelling among his people despite their sinfulness. The atoning work of the high priest culminated in his death. This purged the land of the blood guilt associated with the violent death and allowed those convicted of manslaughter to leave these cities and to return home. So again, there's an atonement. The high priest would make atonement on Yom Kippurim, the Day of Atonements, and he would do this for all the people of Israel. But even at his death, there was an atonement that was provided, because now all those who were guilty of shedding blood, they could return home and be restored back into their families and back into being an active participant among the sons of Israel. Now, taking consideration Yeshua and him laying his life down and the death of him being our high priest for us. Matter of fact, Caiaphas made the same connection. In John 11:47-42, says that the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered the council and they're like, what are we to do? This man performs many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. But one of them, Caiaphas, being the high priest that year, he says, you know nothing at all. What was going on here? He would see Caiaphas being a high priest, he would understand this, what was going on here, and he could see what was happening. He was declaring Yeshua was a righteous man, and he was saying that he would stand as a means of bringing all the people back in. In John 11, back in here, verse 50, Caiaphas kind of explains this. He says, do you understand that it is better for you that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish? He did not say this of his own accord, but being the high priest that year, he prophesied that Yeshua would die for that nation, and not for the nation only, but also to gather into one the children of God who were scattered abroad. He's saying that in the death of Yeshua, this righteous Yeshua, that it would bring all of Israel who was scattered back home. And the issue that the people had here wasn't really even so much about Yeshua as much as it was, if the people go on listening to Yeshua and believing Yeshua and doing all these, then the Romans, they're going to come in and they're going to take us over, and we're going to lose our positions. We're going to lose our power. We're going to lose what we've got. And that was really the big issue, wasn't it? And so what was happening, he was saying, don't you know that it's better that one man die for the nation and to bring a restoration to the people and to bring all the people back in. So there's a greater plan of things that are happening here. Matter of fact, we see this as well in Romans 5, verses 8-12. It says, God demonstrates his own love for us in that the Messiah died on our behalf while we were still sinners. Therefore, Since we have now come to be considered righteous by means of his bloody sacrificial death, how much more will we be delivered through him from the anger of God's judgment? For if we were reconciled to God through his son's death when we were enemies, how much more will we be delivered by his life now that we are reconciled? Verse 11, and not only will we be delivered in the future, but we are boasting about God right now because he has acted through our Lord Yeshua the Messiah, through whom we have already received the reconciliation. Here's how it works. It was through one individual that sin entered the world, and through sin, death. And in this way, death passed through the whole human race, inasmuch as everyone sinned. Go down to Romans 5, verse 18. In other words, just as it was through one offense that all people came under condemnation, so also it is through one righteous act that all people come to be considered righteous. For just as through the disobedience of one man many were made sinners, so also through the obedience of the other man many will be made righteous. What we find here is the place of refuge. Yeshua is the cities of refuge for mankind. He is the one we're guilty, but we run to him. He makes atonement for us, and he provides a way for us to be brought in back safely into the people of Israel, back safely into a place of covenant, back safely into a place of provision of daily life, and dwell with the people and to be beneficial in life to that. And this is not just for those naturally born Israel as well, but all who would come to faith in him, all who would say, okay, I've lived life my way, but I want to come and serve the one true God. And this is things that we see in Galatians 3, verses 8, 14, and 29. Really read the whole thing in the context, but Galatians 3, 8, 14, and 29, we find that the scriptures, we're seeing that God would justify the nations, the Gentiles, by faith. He declared the gospel before unto Abraham, saying, in you shall all the nations be blessed. So that in Messiah Yeshua, the blessing of Abraham might come to the Gentiles, so that we might receive the promised Spirit through faith. And if you are the Messiahs, then you are Abraham's offspring and heirs according to the promise. What we showed here earlier is that Yeshua, he was that kinsman redeemer. Okay, we find that of Yahweh saying that he will be a redeemer for his people. Yeshua is that redeemer. And what we find in relationship to Abraham, we read that Yeshua came to be a redeemer, one to restore for all the offspring of Abraham. And what does it say here? The offspring of Abraham are who? Those who believe in Yeshua. They are the offspring of Abraham and heirs according to the promise. How could he make this promise as a redeemer, as a deliverer, as the Goel, right? How could he do all of this? He could do this because he is the one who stood in the place of covenant. When Yahweh made covenant with Abraham, it was Yeshua that stood in the place of covenant to bring that about. He is the redeemer that was declared at the beginning. He was the one who brought, who walked between the pieces. Yahweh and Yeshua walked between the pieces there with Abraham, and he is the one who could bring this blessing that was declared toward Abraham into the nations, and it's all done because of who he is. He is the one who redeemed and brought into a place of rightful standing in a place of covenant with the Most High. It's a lot to be said in there, guys. I hope you get the opportunity, the chance to kind of go back over and look over these scriptures again, kind of study this out a little further, okay? Well, guys, that's all I've got for you on this week. I pray this has been encouragement to you, and I pray it blesses you as well. If it has been a blessing to you, then share it. Whatever avenue you watch or listen, share them. If it blessed you, it'll probably bless somebody else, right? So share them, help get the word out there. And if this has been a blessing to you, then please consider making a donation to help us continue making these videos and continue to help getting them out there, okay? And again, like we said, if it's blessed you, if it's been an encouragement to you, it's likely going to do the same for somebody else. So help us in that, all right? So until next time, guys, I pray that you be blessed, and be a blessing, and shalom.